on what's in this for brands. You know, why do brands care about it? Brian was saying how it's kind of moving upstream to a much more transactional level. And I think what he was saying is that's about the data. And when you can understand that data and apply it to branding and messaging, you know, you've really got a powerful loop. But in the short term, I see everything going on in this business driving us more towards performance metrics. And I get concerned sometimes that the brand's being left out of the mix. On the other hand, you have big enterprises like real serious brands like Kellogg's adding in-house capabilities. And Brian was talking about retailers creating their own trading desks. I found that fascinating. I didn't even know about that, so I'll have to follow up. So to lead our next panel, I'd like to introduce Ryan Polley, who is the Vice President Corporate Development at comScore. And in that role, you know, he works with leading publishers, marketers, and technology companies to develop the best advertising and research products to help us understand exactly who's seeing what and how they're reacting to it. Before that, he was COO of Ads Expose, and I'd like to introduce Ryan to lead our panel. Ryan?
Well, great. That couldn't have been a better introduction with the thorough overview of where we are from an RTB perspective. And as Joe mentioned, we really want to cover how brands are embracing RTB, what's required to have them use the technologies and tools more effectively. And so to start off, I'd like to introduce the panel. We've got Brendan Moorcroft, who's the CEO of Mediabrands, the audience platform. And then Marcus Pratt, who's the Director of Insight and Technologies for MediaSmith. Alan Smith, Head of Media for North America for Essence Digital. And why don't you guys start out by talking a little bit about your role and how RTB plays a role in your business today from a operational perspective. Brendan?
Sure. So Cadreon is the company that we created within Interpublic Group. Brian alluded to being one of the first in the RTB space. Cadreon was a service unit that we created inside of a holding company to be what is now coined agency trading desks. So obviously it's fairly critical for my business to understand the RTB space.
And so MediaSmith is an independent media agency based here in San Francisco, about 50 employees. And we're primarily digital, but we do all media. In my role, I oversee the execution of all RTB, which is part of almost every campaign that we're doing currently, and also assist in evaluating new media platforms and identifying opportunities for our clients.
And so Essence is a full-service digital agency, a global agency as well. So. And in a similar vein to what Marcus said, so really looking at the spectrum of all digital media, and obviously as RTB grows, that's becoming more and more important for us.
Great. So I guess the fundamental question for the panelists today, and we'll dig in, is why are brands embracing RTB? And is it all about performance, efficiency, immediacy, conversions? So are they using it as a platform to drive conversion and not just for upper funnel awareness?
I'll take the first crack. It's all of those things, right? So I'll draft off of what Brian was saying earlier as well. It hasn't caught on to some of the core upper funnel reach and frequency based media terms like the rest of the media universe has. But it's only a matter of time. I think Brian and I agree that it's just a matter of time before this actually starts to hit. First and foremost, the same way that brands and clients embraced digital was how they embraced the RTB space. So it was those that were in B2B marketing. It was those that were in demand generation. It was those that were using data and intelligence to make decisions as fast as they could and had operationalized how to do so, how to build creative, how to build media. Those were the first to embrace it. And it's natural. For us, it wasn't a surprise. We saw it in our client base. Anybody that was more metric-based Microsoft was our first client that embraced this. They were heavily metric-based. They had tools and technologies that could interpret what the space was doing, and they jumped all in. They're also a media company. They're also a technology company. We've seen that trend just continue. Those that seek performance, those who are trying to sell things and have got hard data to prove that they can, jumped all in. Now we're starting to see people that can interpret audience trends, data trends, so pieces of information, digital breadcrumbs that people are leaving behind, whether it's on a social platform, whether it's web browsing. The fact that we can expand our definition of audience segments, that we can see behavior that may correlate to a decision down the road, is making it really appealing for brands to start to research and watch what people are doing and then make decisions on how to spend media. So we are starting to see a shift and a swing that as a brand-based marketer, you're going to start to understand your audience a little bit in more detail with more accurate data than you could before. Closer to what Brian alluded to as transactional level. We totally agree. That you can see transactional data of audiences come to light and you can do something about it. As a brand marketer, why in the hell wouldn't you want that? That's phenomenal. That is a great thing to jump on. So we are seeing it across the board for all.
Got it. I would just add that I think that the reason a lot of brands got into this in the first place was the same reason they started buying ad networks several years ago: reach and efficiency. And these things started showing up on media plans, and a client might say, well, what is a rocket fuel or something like that? And they didn't even necessarily know it was RTB before we started having all these conferences, but they found that it was effective at meeting whatever their goals were, and a lot of those were conversion at first, they were efficient reach, frequency, but now you're seeing the level of control that a brand marketer can get in saying, I want to hit 50% of that audience 3 times in a week. It's a lot easier to do that if you incorporate RTB, even if it's a brand metric, than if you're going out and piecing it together with direct site buys.
Marcus, I agree with you, but there's one major distinction that I think we still have to ensure people understand. There is a difference between a trader, somebody who does understand the notion of real-time buying and is using a piece of trading software that we call DSPs, versus folks that are still buying in aggregate into networks or guaranteed trade. There is still a fundamental difference between how a media person makes a decision to evaluate point-based, GRP-based, impression-based, CPM-based buying versus those that understand how to use a piece of software and enable all of the tools that they've got at their disposal using a suite of software. They're still not the same thing. No. They're converging, absolutely, but they're still not the same thing.
I completely agree, and I think that's where we're seeing the evolution going for some of these marketers that didn't know they were getting RTB on their media plan, but it was being done, and now they're saying, hey, tell me more about this and how can we take the control?
I think you guys are making really good points. So
thank you.
It's nice, isn't it? It's a good way to start the day. But I think we're kind of moving from a world where, like you said, we were replacing ad networks, which is actually a very tactical thing. So we were in a world where we're really just trying to incrementally make things different. And now actually we're moving to a world where we can buy and leverage first and third party data and be much more strategic about how do we buy today and how can we move the needle on that today in order to achieve what we need tomorrow. And I think video is a great medium to really leverage for that. I think what you were alluding to earlier was basically that maybe the brand side of things is not quite there yet. And maybe it's not, but mostly because a lot of the platforms are kind of separated in delivering video inventory. But actually, the fact that video inventory is there and we can use it and leverage that, and it's an effective medium in order to build a brand, I think actually things have moved on quite considerably in the last few months.
Great. So one of the things that Brian mentioned was that transparency has been at the top of the list for a while now as one of the concerns. I guess that has a number of meanings depending on where you sit. Why do you think that still remains a concern? And is it something that you hear from brands as a concern?
Yes. Everybody's concerned with that. Easy. I think from our side, when we're out buying exchange-based inventory, there's a lot of inventory out there that is not transparent. And people always say, well, why is that a publisher would want to hide that? And I tell them, either it's something really bad and they don't want you to know how terrible it is, or it's something really good and they don't want you to know what a great deal you're getting. But in our experience, we have that conversation with our clients. We tell them, these are the options that we have, and some of them say, I only want to buy properties where I know the exact URL where I'm showing up, and we say, okay, and we can make that happen. For others, we can say, hey, we might be able to get something else for a lower rate, and if it works for you, it works for you, but here's the risk, and here's what we're losing in terms of transparency there, and they understand that.
Yeah, and on the agency side, Joe wrote a piece sitting on in front of everybody today about the differences in the holding companies, and each of the holding companies have chosen to go down a slightly different path about the business model that drives. And so you've got, on one side, you've got Group M, on the other side you have IPG, and we've just fundamentally chosen different paths of how we operationalize this business. I think we do need to clear the transparency lines. But there's also a bit of more of a macro point here, and I think this is still something that just plagues digital today. Transparency and where are my ads? I mean, crap, that's still a thing that we're addressing. Like, show me my ads. I'm spending this money. Show it to me. I want to see it at all times. We talk about ad avoidance. We can't even find our ads. Yeah. I mean, that's the craziest part.
The longer this industry spends its time trying to figure out where their ads are, the worse we're going to be. You know,
absolutely.
If we can move to a world that's completely transparent and then move into things like viewability, then we're in a much better world than, you know, for everyone, not just for
trust the
individual
software,
agencies.
basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
Good. So let's jump to talk a little bit about data and the role of data. Obviously, in RTB environment, that's a key component. And for brands to have scale using data, is that given that some of the risks that have occurred more recently with Firefox and others, is there really a concern that that we should be thinking about? I mean, Brian mentioned that it's probably not as high on the concern list, but are you hearing from brands related to this space where the access to data is something they're concerned about?
No, I think people stealing data is what people are concerned about more than anything else. I mean, I think that's what's still holding major publishing companies that have got such rich understanding of their consumers and the data behind what they use. People are still concerned about that being leaked and taken anywhere else. I think we need to be prepared for the transition from a third-party data world to a first-party data world. Absolutely, that's coming. We know it's coming. Companies like MediaMath are doing great acquisitions and deals with Akamai so they can understand how you compare CMS technology and whatever's serving in a first-party state to what's being held in a cookie today. That world will change, and so we'll have a whole host of big opportunities for software companies to help bridge that gap for us. But we're still going to use data on audiences to make better decisions about what to serve them or what media to buy. The mechanics around how it works, sure, they're definitely going to evolve. We'd be silly not to think they wouldn't evolve.
I think there's an element of needing industry help. So I think companies like Evidon have done fantastically well in kind of consulting and helping. I guess it kind of, for me, it comes back to the industry. You know, there's a big difference between someone being uneducated and then getting getting sued for doing something wrong, which I think is happening and is going to happen a lot more. And I think there needs to be kind of a more of an industry stance on helping brands to be in line and to audit and make sure that things are done, rather than agencies or brands having to employ an Evidon to make sure that they're whiter than white. It's, you know, at this point it's a very complex situation. If you look at, you know, there's the US, yes, but if you look at, you know, if you're a European marketer, you have, you know, Germany's a great example of that. You've got regional laws as well as national laws, and they're all different and they don't agree with each other. And if you're a marketer in that world, I mean, how are you supposed to keep up? I think you need help from bodies to make sure that you're in line from a data perspective. And also, you know, I think the big concern is the leakage of data. I don't necessarily think it's, you know, I think if you're trusting to work with a company, then the trust of the data should be there as well.
I think we are going to see some interesting lawsuits probably in the next couple of years. To echo what you said, particularly in bringing on more first-party data and using that online, I think there are some companies that are going to overstep the boundaries and push the envelopes in, you know, taking consumer-level, you know, purchase data that is totally personally identifiable and sanitizing it in some fashion and making that into something you can track and target online. I think somebody's going to go too far, or they're going to miss one step there, and you're going to see that there are people that are actually personally identifiable in their cookie data or whatever personally information it is that's in their browser, and if somebody catches wind of that, they're going to be upset.
And I guess from an industry perspective, you know, if we know that's going to happen, should there be someone out there trying to help stop that rather than let the lawsuits, follow suit? I guess that, for me, that's
why the NAI
we're our own
exists.
worst enemy,
But I actually think we've done a pretty good job as an industry in self-regulating our activity, because at the end of the day, if you're on the buy side, you're only here to be able to ensure that your client performance is doing as best as it possibly can. And if you do anything, if there's any malpractice that prevents that, then you're screwed. You'd stop.
Exactly.
So as long as there's a constant emphasis on the performance of, I think that's a lot of the self-policing that'll go on.
Great. So one of the things I think, Alan, you noted was that one of the challenges perhaps for brands with RTB today is that it's primarily display inventory, and moving to video might have an impact. I guess that to the data question and your points about that a lot of the data that potentially is at risk is some of this maybe retail data, because it's so personally identifiable. It's purchase information, it's a purchase history, and some of that's being used. It would seem that brands would really want to take advantage of that data, and they could use it in display effectively. And so given the volume of inventory that exists today for brands with this data, clearly there's an opportunity there for brands to be leveraging that. You guys are probably seeing that?
Just leveraging, so leveraging first-party data in order to be better, absolutely. And retailers are very good in this space. You only have to look at companies like Criteo to really understand how much growth we've seen. So the mere fact that retailers can contextualize every buy based on who's visited their site and what they've bought is an incredibly powerful thing, and it's what will drive business. But from my perspective, there's an element of incrementality into that too. So yes, we know the people. It's important to know the people we have today, but it's important to grow that consumer base.
I think there's an issue of scale when you apply data to video as well that's hindering growth. And we all talk about people are watching more and more video online, and that's definitely true. Where that's happening, a lot of it's happening in these premium environments, and it's maybe in a place like Hulu where now they're allowing more data to be brought in and put on top of their buys, but that's been somewhat of a closed environment historically. So when you talk about data-enabled sort of RTB-based video buying, the inventory is somewhat constrained in terms of quality inventory that you can take to CMO of a major brand and say this is where you're running, and then applying that data on top of it, you're just limiting that pool to a point where you're going to have a hard time really competing for those TV dollars, as people tend to talk about.
I think there's an element of kind of overlaying data. So people often get kind of confused about excluding users because they don't know them. I think in a lot of ways that just means there's an opportunity to sell something different, or to put a brand message out there, to build something, because they're at the top of the funnel. I think understanding that, and you're right, but I think overlaying first-party data in order to, even on video, to understand and maybe deliver a different message is what's important.
So I would just add a couple things. I think first is that every marketer has a voracious appetite for data and is trying to figure out the best indicators to why an audience matters. I think the difference between where we are in the digital space today and why it's still in display and it hasn't hit the other channels yet is we've made it transactional. We've fit the data signals to pieces of software and algorithms to do something about it. But that is coming everywhere. Every traded, served way of getting a piece of media is going to have an element that's traded through one of these software pieces, and that audience data is going to be what you interpret to decide what you invest in and not. I think if you look at bigger signals, look at Twitter's acquisition of Bluefin Labs, a great company that was starting to take chatter about programming to redefine the way you measure TV. And give you a different effect to now trade on the currency of a program. And if now Twitter is now the foundational element of capturing all of this, all what we used to call old water cooler effect around content of TV, that if you start to push that into a tradable world, that you've got a data signal on a piece of content, and now that content may be worth something a little bit more than you did before, and a GRP isn't really the thing that you want to measure it on, you're going to add a transactional system to that. That's why we're doing this. It's just another way of taking a data-driven decision that we always are chasing on an audience to do something with it. We're just interjecting software in the middle of it.
So I guess then software eats the world over time, and
that's what Microsoft has been saying for years.
And to that point, and your earlier point of there are traders and then there are kind of traditional media buyers, and that there are all these new metrics that are being used. How do you compare the different mediums if you don't have a singular currency to drive a comparison across?
You've got really smart media mix models, and you work with companies like yours to interpret all these signals coming in. I mean, I think that's what agencies are going to spend a ton of time investing in analytics to try to determine what is the cause and effect of all these decisions that we're making. And it's opening up a whole new channel of services for us. It's introducing a whole new wave of capabilities, and it's bringing a whole new type of person into our industry. All are really positive things.
Yeah, I think for me, this question about, question about GRPs across channels, if fundamentally you can get a common currency where you can, as a marketer, if you can understand how many GRPs across X number of channels in this complicated world reaches your ultimate goal, then absolutely it makes sense. From a digital perspective, we can do so much more. We can deliver so much more insight, both on the planning side and then even on the reflection side, so post-campaign. And I think that's a common currency, and coming down to that so that you can align with your strategic goals is absolutely important. But it doesn't, the insight should not stop there.
And I think it's never been just about GRPs. I mean, we know if that's all a client wants, you can go and buy a bunch of quarter-page newspaper ads. Your money goes a lot farther in terms of GRPs, but a GRP is not a common currency across online, print, radio, broadcast television, because the units are all different, the experiences are all different. A 60-minute spot on the Super Bowl is going to cost a lot more, on a per point basis than a 5-second teaser on radio, and that's the way it's always been. So there's more that goes into that analysis than just what is the cost per point.
Great. So I guess with television today and the effort to bring more dollars from TV to online, and knowing that the buyers are using this currency, what steps do we need to take as an industry to help them better understand the impact and effect that can come from this medium versus the existing? Or is it more about, over time, that medium becomes connected in a way and converged where the data's there?
It's not an either or, right?
Yeah.
I mean, again, yes, within our industry, I think we always talk about where we're taking share from one place to another. But the truth is, in a connected world, a connected consumer, an agency is only worth its salt if it understands how all of this works concurrently together. That's still what our job is on the buy side, is to figure out how all those things come together. To me, it's not a dilutive exercise. Brian's stats sort of play it out. There's more media, there's more intersection points. It's just trying to figure out the right sequence of events to try to do. How does this work concurrently together? If you have a trade-off on how much you spend, what's going to be the most effective choice, given you're forced to make a trade-off because you can't spend all the money in the world to do every media plan.
Yeah,
that's what our job is.
That trade-off is kind of key to what it's about, because every channel has different impacts on each other and also just generally on the consumer. Competing with kind of like primetime TV with, I don't know, an online video is a pretty tall order, and the amount of frequency you need to get to do that in online video versus one primetime exposure is totally different. And I think understanding the impact of each channel and even the weight within that is what's important. And whether that, if we can then delineate that back to some sort of common currency, great. But I think there's no silver bullet. I think everyone is totally different.
And I also think we just need, as an industry, I think we need to create better content that lives digitally. I think the greatest example I saw last year, the thing that I still think was the single biggest event, was watching Felix jump out of a freaking balloon. I don't know how high it was above the earth, but that was an incredible marketing event. Red Bull absolutely crushed it. That was the best ad of the year last year, and that was video-based content online. That stunned the industry. I mean, we got to do more of those type of things, right? Great, smart content created in an environment that it absolutely works and it gets shared and spread immediately. I mean, that's what we need to do more of.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, digital has so much more potential to create much more meaningful impacts. Okay, it just doesn't have the mass and the scale and the that power, but the potential of the platform is so much more. And the Red Bull example is a good one.
The Red Bull example is also a good example of scale. I mean,
Yeah.
look at how many millions of people watched that thing happen, and then how many more millions of people shared it. That was a major scale event. It's not that we don't have a scale. It's just that we don't repeat it often enough.
And I think most marketers now are not taking that approach. They're saying, how can I take my 30-second spot and put it online? And we're going to have to see a shift in how people are thinking about that. And it's not a broadcast buyer that's going to say, you know what, I'm going to allocate 10% more of my budget to online. That might start to happen as we see more and more people that are just not tuning into traditional television, and you're going to have to reach them somewhere else. You can't just hit your audience by a couple of primetime spots anymore. But it is going to require a shift, I think, at the CMO or the high-level marketer in the organization to decide this is how we're going to take this content, and we're going to shift our approach in what is branded video content when we're online.
I mean, I guess the real miss is, should we really be talking about building a brand? That Red Bull example is a good one of, should we really be talking about a brand buying a spot in the Red Bull ad, in the Red Bull content, or should we actually be trying to be what Red Bull are trying to do? Build brands, build experiences around just different and more diverse content and things that engage consumers rather than a 30-second spot. And I think that's, for me, that's where we need to shift, is much more to custom and different things, because the consumer landscape is much more diverse and harder to navigate these days.
Yeah, that's great. I guess I don't know the math on the Red Bull investment on a CPM basis.
Well, but it's what they do. That's
There's
their
some smart media
consistent
people in this
effort.
room that can figure that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And they did take some of that footage and put it into a broadcast TV spot that they ran later. So.
Good. So one of the things Brian mentioned as well is that there's a local TV opportunity. Are you guys doing any experimentation today with programmatic on television?
Yes, we're doing exactly what Brian talked about. So we've been skunk working something that we've called Map TV for the last 9 months. we've actually signed up about 10 advertisers. We've spent a couple $1 million now taking that exact approach. So taking a data inventory approach to programmatically deciding what TV we can buy across local cable channels.
It seems like it's challenging to actually buy television on a real-time basis, and I think Brian said, we don't have that dynamic insertion for the majority of inventory yet. We're seeing more and more things that are on televisions but delivered through the internet that are getting scale. So we can tap into all the inventory that you might have that's ad supported on somebody's Roku box or whatever might be there. And there's a lot of really niche content that can be extremely targeted. The scale is not huge right now. I think on the other side, we're seeing use of data, not necessarily in a pure programmatic real-time fashion, but things like what Simul Media is doing in buying that inventory more intelligently and applying more than just your Nielsen data to a television buy. So the two of those are going to start to come together. But right now, we're still not seeing that we can go in and dynamically serve an ad to this household and a different ad to that household when they're watching their local news.
Yeah, and I mean, as a digital agency, we work with a lot of offline TV buying agencies, and I think actually it's good to work with these agencies, and I'm not trying to eat their lunch or anything like that. There's a lot that they can do to help. I mean, the amount of scale that they're buying on TV impacts the efficiency at which they buy, and that is important for a brand. But also, there's a lot that we can bring to the table. The Twitter Bluefin acquisition and just kind of having social buzz monitoring to help inform the buy, as well as also, just the understanding of the contextualization of the creatives we do in our buys can help inform how they deliver messages on TV. And so I think, again, we're not trying to eat their lunch, but it's definitely a case of closer collaboration in order to create, just a better end product.
Great. So to get scale and to get across these different platforms, one of the challenges that is commonly brought up with the Lumascape is that there's a lot of fragmentation today. Are you guys seeing that that's impacting your ability to buy through singular platforms? Have you created your own tools? How are you able to solve for that today for the brands you work with?
Yeah, I as an agency, I find this incredibly hard, and I think the choice from a buyer is so the choice in technology and also inventory is so incredibly complex today. As an agency, actually, we took the stance pretty early on that again there are so many smart and talented people in this industry that will push forward their own products. So being agnostic is an incredibly important thing to be. I think what's starting to challenge that for me is the stacks. So things like DoubleClick, Google's stack, and making it easier to make choices is becoming harder to become agnostic. But for me, it's still important to remain this kind of pick the best product for the best purpose. And invest in that rather than pick something that might or might not win out and may not be best for the client at the end of the day.
And does that probably has more resource requirements for you, given, yeah?
Yeah, it does. But again, it kind of has an upside, in efficiency and also just understand usability and training on the platform. But it's important to know the market and survey the market.
I think the promise of RTB to a certain extent was to bring in some of this standardization and say, you don't have to go and do $1,000, $10,000 media buys with all these different sites if you want to reach, very specific content. And we've seen that there are some standards, and obviously you can have one platform and go out and buy multiple sources of inventory. But I think you're right. It could be going back the other way. Will we see a point where you can't use the DoubleClick bid manager to buy AppNexus inventory? I don't know. Hopefully not. But there is a little bit of that fragmentation as I think people are entrenching themselves into their own tech stacks.
For me, I think this is the greatest time to be doing what we're doing. It's a paradigm shift. I think you change the way you fundamentally think about how you go to market with a solution. No longer can you pick one stack, and make a trade-off every single time. People have had to create. We've adopted the approach of creating an open ecosystem, an open marketplace where we can look at best-in-class individual pieces of technology. People have got a bigger vertical stack, and we can now just let empirical evidence start to guide the selections that we make, start to configure custom solutions. This is just a new skill set. This is a new industry, and it's awesome. I mean, this is, again, the most exciting time to be doing what we're doing because we have greater data, better tools, smarter people. Everything about what we're doing is just that much better than what we tried to do during the first wave of digital when this whole thing started 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think we all agree. It is a great time to be in our space. Given that, I'm sure there are still some significant challenges. Could you speak to kind of the biggest ones you see that we still need to overcome?
Well, I think it's the myths, and Brian actually laid 7 of them out there, and the fact that we haven't taken one of them off is probably the biggest indicator that we're still there. I mean, we're in the very early stages of a transformational movement in our space. We're in the first innings. We're the infant. Use any kludgy analogy you want. It's the beginning. So we're still trying to figure it out. That's more the message. It's not that we should stop doing certain things, that we just need to constantly evolve the how, the what, because the principles are going to remain exactly as they are. We're just going to get smarter and learn more about how we do it, and we're going to start to solve some of these tensions between buy-side technology, people, operational systems versus technology systems, all these things that are at conflict. We just need to let those conflicts work out and let performance be our guide. Let the end goal of what we're doing be our ultimate guide, which is, are we effectively being paid to sell something on behalf of a client? Are we effectively shifting a piece of consumer behavior so that they change awareness of something? As long as that's our end goal, the how and all these conflicts are going to be resolved at a certain point.
I think one thing that we could probably fix relatively quickly and encourage brand advertisers to start spending more dollars through RTB would be ad formats. So right now we're looking at standard IAB display units accounting for the majority of RTB spend, and I would estimate 98+% of actual impressions served. Sure, we've got video coming online. I was really hopeful to see the IAB Rising Stars come out and standardize some much better looking units that brand advertisers are going to want, and that frankly I'll pay a publisher a lot more money to buy in an RTB environment. I know people are working to bring some of these online, but the scale still is not there. We're seeing in the past year more 300 by 600 ad units coming online, which is, okay, great, we have a slightly bigger ad, but it's still not a really good brand experience. Roadblocks or, site skin, whole takeovers are not something that we can really go and buy at scale programmatically. And you look at native advertising and what's happening there, obviously that's going to be a real challenge for us to go and buy native advertising. I think that's going to have to be done hand to hand, but we should be able to go out and buy high quality, rich media, standardized ad units across thousands of websites, and I think we should be able to do it this year.
Yeah, everything needs to be improved and should always be improved all the time. I think the industry needs to work together in order to get things approved. These intermittent things that are causing us to just delay the execution of great work. So things like, viewability for me is a great example. Everyone knows that it's important. Everyone knows that it works. We can't quite agree on a standard, both in terms of technology and then also, education and the percent at which is acceptable. Yet we can do that. We could all agree something like that. It's completely within our reach, and actually it would be more effective for the industry if we did. And I think these are the kind of things that, there needs to be much more of a collective kind of push forward and getting momentum behind these fundamentals, and so we can all deliver better experiences to all of our different brands.
So Joe had asked Brian a question at the end about what's driving the drop in growth from the prior prediction. And I wondered if you guys had any thoughts on that yourselves in regard to what you're seeing in your business, and to the point of perhaps viewability. Is it access to inventory? Has it become more efficient? So it's not about the dollars being spent total, it's about the quality of the inventory.
Well, I could say that our numbers have not dipped. We've actually had a fairly big increase in the last year. I think that what's driving our growth. So North America, the trend line is still growing, but it's not growing as fast as it's growing outside of North America. Outside of North America, we're just seeing an incredible appetite to like what happened with search and every other digital trend hitting outside of the US. It gets adopted really quickly. The growth curve is steeper. So it's actually happening faster outside of North America. I think the aggregate is, there's probably an efficiency game that's being played outside of the US as well. But for us, it's actually still a growing market.
I think there are several factors at play. I think one is there is a bit of a flight to quality, and there are some things that are just not coming into that programmatic space that maybe we thought they would. The premium stuff, the publishers are moving really a lot slower. I think Dow Jones now has some of their inventory accessible through a private marketplace, but they're very careful about how they'll sell that and who they sell it to. They really want net new advertisers, not people that they're already doing direct business with. So I think that has been slower. Then you have more excitement around native advertising and dollars going there. And on a CPM basis, those things tend to be much more expensive. So we're still running a lot of impressions through RTB, but if anything, with the addition of FBX, some of that pricing is going down because you can get a lot of inventory on Facebook for less than a $1 CPM. So I think that might be bringing some things down a little bit with the sort of first party, retargeting and blasting out, dropping a lot of cookies. People now have another channel to do that. And then when they really want a high quality experience, they're still needing to go direct for at least a certain portion of that spend.
Yeah, from my perspective, there's growth, and there's definitely, you can see in the industry, there's obviously a problem with kind of optimizing yourself towards oblivion, because you identify a metric that might be good today but may not be right for you tomorrow. And so that obviously means that you optimize yourself towards nothing, and as impressions get cheaper and cheaper, you really start to get into, I guess, probably a pretty difficult world. I think what's nice about the people are becoming smarter with data. There's better ad units like video coming on board. It means that people can actually effectively pay more for impressions and be smarter about the targeting. Also, I like to think that people are managing customers better. So rather than just looking to sell to someone today and that be the end of it, they're using a much more kind of CRM approach with what they're doing in display, so that they're delivering different messages to consumers rather than just kind of choosing to not buy them or to just to kind of optimize themselves towards only a CPA and that one static metric.
So you mentioned viewability a couple times, Alan, and obviously that's an important thing to comScore. I wonder, there's been a number of suggestions that it's all just math. So I'd love to get your perspective on why viewability matters. I certainly have my own. But when 50% of the ads aren't seen, but you're factoring that in with the CPM and the way you're paying, and if it's about an ROI, then why does it really matter?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess when I saw the results, it made sense. Viewability was a direct correlation to performance. And that to
Shocking.
me, yeah, exactly, right.
The
And
more people that see ads, the more effective this is going to be.
That's
This
exactly
is freaking awesome. We have cracked it as an industry, man. Let's do it.
And I think, well, that's an interesting point, right? Because there's this whole problem of people potentially not measuring things in the right way, and and that then leading to basically cookie stuffing and ultimately recording sales that were perhaps not real. But for me, a lot of what we're doing is measured on a CPA basis, but also on kind of attitudinal study basis, and so the exposure is so important in order for us to ultimately maximize that kind of shift in attitude. And so for us, it's a fundamental in making sure people see ads so that we can ultimately perform. But you're right, you highlight an interesting point, which is the value of that. So when you rationalize it all, and when you come out to, well, effectively I paid this, but the viewability was X%, and now I've got viewable ads that are at this CPM, and that compares to to another publisher. Yes, that is important. So viewability standards within different types of media are what's important. Like an ad network has a considerably different viewability percentage to a premium publisher, and understanding that and understanding the value is something that we actually bring into our planning process so that we can be more effective in the way that we plan and execute, and that is definitely a consideration for this.
Let me just say, when we talk about buying only viewable impressions, I've heard the argument that it's going to be better for the buyer and we're going to have greater efficiencies because we're only buying viewable impressions. I've heard the argument that it's going to be better for the publisher because they're going to be able to charge more for their viewable impressions. Those both can't be right. And then on the other hand, you have comScore, who is trying to make a business out of this. And to Brian's point of advertisers aren't spending more and more and more, it's relatively fixed. So I don't see that it's going to be a huge win really for any of us. Probably comScore, you guys have the best chance to take a share out there, but I do see it as more of a math game. And okay, we only pay for the ads that are seen, but half of them weren't seen, so we pay twice as much, plus a little bit for comScore to keep us all in line. And yeah, we have better metrics at the end of the day. We're not taking credit for a sale for somebody that didn't see an ad at all, but I think we're going to have to go one step beyond just measuring the viewability into, did people actually register the ad? Did they look at it from an eye tracking standpoint? And did they take an action as a result of seeing it that we can prove out statistically?
So for me, I think that there's just a couple of things. Number one, forget about the math. This is not about the math. This is about just bringing quality to the fore. It's a conversation around do what you say you're going to do. It's just like third-party ad serving and how we used to have to agree on what a publisher said was served versus what a buyer said was served. It's exactly the same thing as ad verification, and when you had to audit through Double Verify and all these other companies to say that you bought the people that you thought you were going to buy, and you sold the people that you thought. It's just a call to quality. Do what you say you're going to do. Serve to who you say it's going to serve. Don't create more ads below the fold that are running in comparison. It's just a call to that. So let the mechanics just be that at its top end.
Great. So I think we're at our time, but we have a couple of minutes
yeah.
for questions.
If you have any questions.
Oh, Norm Page, shocking.
Norm Page, celebrating my first day of work at the Rubicon Project. I've been practicing that all morning. I wanted to bring the conversation.
Glad you didn't say your first day of work, 'cause, then we would.
I wanted to bring the conversation back to first-party data, and I'm curious what the more sophisticated brands are doing about data activation of first-party data. I think we all get that they're overlaying it on media and buying it. I think everybody in the room, speaking for everybody here, we get that. What are you seeing as trends in terms of what the really sophisticated brands are thinking about, anywhere from, hey, can we do a private data exchange within the holding company, to, I get this stuff better than you do, and I'm going to go build my own stack?
Well, maybe I don't think it's about the building your own stack, Norm. I think creating private exchanges, like this is probably going to be the thing that drives premium media companies into private exchanges, because if you can guarantee that it's a controlled environment where you are responsible for your own data, and a client is willing to partner with you, and you know that that is the only place and only way data is going to get transacted on, then I'm willing to bring more of my inventory in. I'm willing to bring more of my content in. As a client, I'm willing to bring my my subscriber lists. I'm willing to bring my customer data in so that we can match those and do really smart cross-selling campaigns, starting to focus on loyalty being an angle and not just prospect-based advertising. I think, Norm, we're absolutely seeing that trend, that sophisticated clients that have used their data well, auto manufacturers, CPGs, who they use audience intelligence really well. They're just bringing that now into our stack so that you can transact on it on a media sense with a little bit more speed than they could before. And I think that's the biggest change that we've seen.
And that's been happening in the offline world for some time now. There are these data exchanges where people can get more insight into, let's look at our top 10 or 20% best customers, and what do they look like, and where can we get more information to append to our own database. Now that's actionable because we can bring that online, and we can say, let's find out exactly who those people are, bring in data points from 200 other retailers or advertisers, and then serve ads to those that fit that characteristic of our client's best customer but are not current customers. So I think we're seeing the offline-online gap starting to be bridged a little bit.
Yeah, and so there's definitely an overlay of offline metrics. I guess the thing that always kind of the thing that I always struggle with in data is understanding the value of data. There's a lot of data providers out there, and they're selling a lot of data that's actually, the quality of it is very disparate. And actually, it means if you're really trying to test data and develop a program around data, then if the quality is so varying, then you can't really build and really progress on that. And I think that's something that is a real struggle for a lot of agencies.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.